The silence in my apartment was a physical thing, a heavy blanket woven from the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sigh of traffic. It was a silence I had cultivated, a necessary component of my work. I painted light, or rather, the memory of light. The way it fell across an empty chair, the way it dissolved into the grain of an old wooden floor. My life was a collection of these quiet, observed moments, a gallery of stillness. I was the curator, the sole visitor, and often the subject. Lonely wasn't the right word. Solitary. Yes, that was it. A self-imposed, comfortable solitude that had, over the last few months, begun to feel less like a choice and more like a sentence. The reason for this shift lived across the hall in 3B. Julian. He was noise and motion, a stark contrast to my curated quiet. I knew him mostly through sounds that bled through the walls. The low thrum of a bass line in the evenings, the sharp buzz of a saw on a Saturday afternoon, the hearty, rumbling laugh that sometimes echoed in the hallway. He was a carpenter, a creator of solid, tangible things. While I captured fleeting moments with pigment and oil, he shaped wood with his hands, leaving behind the scent of sawdust and varnish wherever he went. From my window, which overlooked the small shared courtyard, I had a perfect vantage point to observe him. I watched him haul lumber from his truck, the muscles in his back and shoulders bunching under his worn t-shirt. I watched him talk on the phone, pacing the length of the grass, one hand raking through his dark, unruly hair. He had a way of standing, feet planted firmly, that radiated a simple, uncomplicated confidence I could only dream of. He was a man thoroughly at home in his own skin, in his own world. And I, from the quiet remove of my window, was a ghost in mine. We had a nodding acquaintance, the kind common in apartment buildings. A hey, in the mailroom, a held door, a shared, awkward wait for the elevator. Each interaction was a miniature storm in my chest, leaving me flustered and replaying my stilted responses for hours. He had a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, a direct, steady gaze that always made me feel seen, and a voice that was low and warm, like aged whiskey. My crush was as silent and as private as everything else in my life, a secret watercolor I kept hidden away, afraid any exposure would cause the colors to run. Then came the knock. It was a Tuesday evening, the sky outside bruised with the coming twilight. The knock was firm, decisive. Julian's knock. My heart gave a stupid, traitorous lurch. I set my palette down, wiped my turpentine-stained hands on a rag, and took a deep breath, trying to slow the frantic beat against my ribs. I pulled the door open just a crack, peering out as if expecting a siege. He was standing there, looking apologetic and impossibly handsome. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt smudged with dirt and a pair of jeans that had seen better days. His hair was damp with sweat, clinging to his forehead, and he was holding a towel and a small dop kit. The scent of sawdust and honest-to-God physical labor rolled off him. "Leo, hey," he said, that low voice a pleasant vibration in the sterile hallway. "Sorry to bother you, man. I've got a bit of an emergency." I opened the door wider. "Oh, is everything okay?" He gave a wry, self-deprecating grin, and it did something catastrophic to my composure. My water heater decided to give up the ghost. Just poof. Cold showers for the foreseeable future, and I am way too grimy for that. He gestured down at himself. "I was wondering, and please say no if it's weird, if I could possibly use your shower? I'd be in and out, I swear." My brain short-circuited. Julian. In my apartment. In my shower. The domesticity of the request was so jarring, so intimate. It felt like a scene from a different life. I tried to form a sentence, but my tongue felt thick. All I could manage was a nod. A series of short, jerky nods. His smile widened, full of relief. "You're a lifesaver. Seriously, I owe you 1 inch. It's no problem." I finally managed to croak, stepping back to let him in. He moved past me into my small living space, and his presence immediately changed the atmosphere. The air, usually still and smelling of paint and solitude, was now charged, filled with his energy, his scent. He dwarfed the room, made my carefully arranged furniture seem fragile and small. He looked around, his eyes taking in the canvases stacked against the walls, the easel by the window. "Wow. So this is where you do all that," he said, his gaze lingering on a nearly finished piece, a study of the morning light on my windowsill. It's incredible, the way you get the light. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. Thanks. The bathroom is just down the hall. To the left, I pointed, my hand trembling slightly. Got it. Thanks again, Leo. I really appreciate this. He headed down the hall, and I was left standing in the middle of my living room, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. I could hear the bathroom door click shut, the sound of the fan whirring to life, and then the rush of water. The sound was deafening in the silence. Julian was in my shower, 10 feet away, and all I could think about was the absurdity, the terrifying, thrilling proximity of it all. This was not a quiet, observed moment. This was happening, right now. I tried to busy myself, to pretend this was normal. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water I didn't want. My hands shook. I leaned against the counter, listening. The sound of the shower was a constant, steady presence. A waterfall in the heart of my quiet little world. I imagined the steam fogging the mirror, the water sluicing over his broad shoulders, the very shoulders I had spent countless hours observing from my window. My mind, a traitor, supplied vivid, unwanted details. The thought made my skin prickle with a mixture of panic and a deep, yearning ache. This was a dangerous line of thought. I needed to stop. I retreated to my easel, picking up a brush, pretending to study the canvas. But my focus was gone, shattered. All my senses were attuned to the sounds coming from the bathroom. The steady drumming of water, a muffled cough, the clink of a shampoo bottle against the tile. Each sound was an intimate detail, a piece of information I had no right to, yet coveted desperately. My own apartment felt alien, transformed by his presence within it. The air was thick with the unspoken. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, the water shut off. The sudden silence was more jarring than the noise had been. My breath caught in my throat. I heard the shower door slide open. A few moments passed. Then, the bathroom door opened a crack. Leo. Julian's voice was muffled by the door, deeper now, resonant in the small space. I stood frozen, brush in hand. Yeah. My own voice sounded thin, reedy. This is going to sound even weirder than the first question. So again, feel free to tell me to get lost. There was a pause. I could hear the vulnerability in it, a slight hesitation that was so unlike the confident man I watched from my window. I pulled something in my shoulder at work today. I can't reach the middle of my back. It's driving me crazy. Would you, Time seemed to slow down, to stretch and warp around his unspoken request. The hum of the refrigerator became a roar in my ears. He wanted me to wash his back. The request was so mundane, so practical, and yet it felt like he had just asked me to help him dismantle a bomb. It was a request born of necessity, but it was landing in a heart primed for intimacy. My mind raced, a frantic slideshow of potential responses, potential humiliations. Say no. Just say it's weird and you're not comfortable. It's the sane, rational thing to do. But the thought of his quiet, "Oh, okay," and the subsequent retreat, the opportunity lost, was a sharper pain than the anticipated awkwardness. This was a moment, a crack in the wall between our separate worlds. And I, who had only ever observed, was being invited to step through. I am standing on the precipice. My own life feels distant, a movie I'm watching. My hand, holding the brush, is white-knuckled. My throat is dry. All I have to do is say a word. Yes. No. The two words feel impossibly large, each a doorway to a different future. Okay, I hear myself say. The word is a whisper, barely audible, but it hangs in the air between us, solid and irrevocable. Really, the relief in his voice was palpable. Man, you are a true saint. Come on in. The door opened wider. I put my brush down with deliberate, slow precision. I walked down the short hallway, each footstep an echoing drumbeat of my own pulse. My apartment, my sanctuary, now felt like a foreign country, and I was an explorer without a map. I pushed the door open. The bathroom was filled with steam, thick and warm, clinging to every surface. It smelled of my soap, a clean, unremarkable scent of sandalwood and citrus, but on him, in this context, it smelled intoxicating. He was standing with his back to me, a towel slung low around his hips, another one draped over his shoulder. Water dripped from the ends of his dark hair, tracing paths down the sharp lines of his spine. My gaze was drawn, inexorably, to his back. It was a landscape I knew from a distance, but up close, it was breathtaking. A wide expanse of sun-kissed skin, defined by the clean, powerful lines of muscle. A few faint scars, pale against his tan, told stories I couldn't guess at. He was so incredibly, solidly real. Not a figure in a window, but a living, breathing man, vulnerable and waiting, in the center of my tiny, steamed-up bathroom. He held out a bar of soap without turning around. "Here," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to be absorbed by the humid air. I took the soap. My fingers were numb. The bar was wet and slippery, warm from the shower water. I stepped closer, my bare feet cold on the damp tile. I was only inches from him now. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. I could see the fine hairs on his arms, the way the water beaded on his shoulders. This was too much. It was everything. I lathered the soap in my hands, my movements clumsy and uncertain. The foam built up, white and fragrant. I took another deep, shaky breath, the steam filling my lungs. I raised my hands. For a heart-stopping second, they hovered in the air behind him, trembling. Then, I touched him. His skin was hot, damp, and firm beneath my palms. A jolt, electric and sharp, shot up my arms. He let out a soft sigh as my hands made contact, a sound of pure relief that sent a tremor through his entire body and through mine. I started to move my hands, tentatively at first, then with more confidence, working the lather across his shoulders. The muscles there were tight, knotted from his work. I pressed my thumbs into the tension, feeling the knots give way slightly under the pressure. This is insane. I am washing my neighbor's back. I am touching him in a way I have only ever dreamed of, and it is happening because of a broken water heater and a pulled muscle. The absurdity of it was almost comical, but there was no room for humor in my mind right now. There was only the sensation of his skin under my hands, the clean scent of the soap, the sound of his quiet breathing mixed with the drip of water from the faucet. My world had shrunk to this single, focused point of contact. The expanse of his back, the glide of my soapy hands. I worked my way down his spine, tracing the vertebrae, feeling the shift of muscle as he breathed. He was so still, so trusting. He had invited me into this space of vulnerability without a second thought, it seemed. Or perhaps with every thought. I couldn't know. My own internal monologue was a roaring furnace of what-ifs and oh my gods. I was acutely aware of everything. The way the steam curled around us, creating a private, secluded world. The way the light from the single bulb overhead diffused through the haze, softening everything. The slight tremor in my own hands, which I prayed he couldn't feel. I was an artist who dealt in abstracts, in light and shadow, and here I was, faced with the most tangible, overwhelming reality I had ever known. A little to the left, he murmured, his voice thick. "Yeah, right there. That's the spot." I followed his direction, concentrating on the knot of muscle just below his shoulder blade. I worked on it gently, my fingers learning the topography of him. It felt less like washing and more like sculpting, like charting a new territory. With every circular motion, a little more of the tension in my own body seemed to dissolve, replaced by a strange, humming calm. We were just two people in a small, steamy room. One in need, one providing. The simplicity of it was disarming. But it wasn't simple. For me, it was a cataclysm. Every second stretched, filled with a weight of unspoken feeling. I wanted to keep my hands on him forever. I wanted to run. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the charged silence, but my throat was closed tight. What could I possibly say? "So, do you have guys wash your back often?" The internal sarcasm was a weak shield against the overwhelming sincerity of the moment. After I had covered every inch of his back, my hands stilled. The task was done. The excuse for this intimacy was gone. I let my hands rest on the small of his back for a moment longer than necessary, a silent, desperate plea. Then I pulled away. The loss of contact was a physical shock, like a sudden cold draft. "All set," I said, my voice hoarse. He reached back, taking the towel from his shoulder and turning on the shower head for a moment to rinse off. I averted my eyes, focusing on a crack in the tile, giving him a semblance of privacy. He turned off the water and began to towel himself dry. The sounds were brisk, efficient. The spell was broken. He turned to face me, the towel still low on his hips. His chest was broad and dusted with dark hair that slicked with water. His face was flushed from the heat. He looked directly at me, and his usual easygoing smile was gone. In its place was a look of quiet intensity, an expression I couldn't decipher. He was studying me, his gaze searching mine. "Leo," he said, his voice quiet but clear in the now silent room. "Thank you. You have no idea." "It was nothing," I lied, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "It was everything." He took a step closer. My breath hitched. He reached out, not to touch me, but to gently wipe a smudge of soap from my cheek with his thumb. The touch was feather-light, almost accidental, but it burned a trail on my skin. His eyes didn't leave mine. The air was so thick I could barely breathe it. 1,000 unspoken questions hung between us in the last remnants of the steam. He held my gaze for another long, agonizing second. I saw something flicker in his eyes, curiosity, maybe something deeper. Then, he seemed to make a decision. He blinked, and the intensity was gone, replaced by his familiar, friendly grin. The shift was so sudden it gave me vertigo. "Well, I should probably get out of your hair," he said, his tone back to its usual casual warmth. "Let you get back to your..." Light catching, he gestured vaguely towards my living room. He gathered his things, dressed quickly in the bathroom while I waited in the hallway, my back pressed against the cool wall, trying to regulate my breathing. He emerged a moment later, fully clothed, his hair still damp. He looked like my neighbor again. The transformation was complete. The vulnerable, half-naked man in the steam was gone. At the door, he paused, his hand on the knob. "Seriously, though, I owe you. How about I make you dinner tomorrow night? To pay you back. My water heater guy can't come until Thursday." Dinner. The word echoed in my head. Another invitation. Another step across the threshold. I should have said no. I should have retreated back into my safe, quiet world where men like Julian were just figures seen through a window. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my own voice. His smile was genuine, reaching his eyes. "Great. It's a date." He winked, a quick, playful gesture, and then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. A date. He'd said it was a date. It was a joke, obviously, a figure of speech. But the word hung in the air of my apartment, a shimmering, impossible promise. I walked back to the bathroom. The air was still warm and humid, smelling of him, of my soap on his skin. I looked at my reflection in the fogged-up mirror. I looked like myself, but everything felt different. The silence that returned to my apartment was no longer heavy or comfortable. It was charged, expectant. It was the silence of waiting, the silence of before. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in overthinking. I replayed the entire shower incident from every conceivable angle. Was it just a simple, practical request from a straight guy who was completely oblivious to the subtext? That seemed the most likely scenario. Straight men had a different barometer for physical contact. It didn't always carry the same weight. He needed help. I was there. End of story. But then I'd remember the look in his eyes afterward, the quiet intensity, the way he'd studied my face, and the thumb on my cheek, so gentle, so deliberate. And that final word, date. It was a throwaway line, a common colloquialism, but he had delivered it with a wink. A damn wink. It was the wink that was undoing me. It suggested an awareness, a shared secret. Or maybe he was just a chronic flirt, charming and easy with everyone. That was also a possibility, a deeply depressing one. I tried to paint, but my hands were unsteady. The light I was trying to capture seemed flat, lifeless. My mind was a chaotic storm of hope and dread. I cleaned my apartment obsessively, as if preparing for a royal visit, then messed it up again to make it look like I hadn't tried so hard. I changed my shirt 3 times before settling on the first one I'd put on. I was a wreck, a bundle of nerves held together by a thin thread of anticipation. At 7 o'clock sharp, there was a knock. This time, I was ready for it. I opened the door to find Julian standing there, holding a grocery bag that smelled tantalizingly of fresh basil and garlic. He was wearing a clean Henley that stretched across his chest and dark jeans. He'd made an effort. My heart did a little flip. "Ready for your payment?" he asked, his smile easy and warm. It instantly put me at ease and simultaneously sent my anxiety into overdrive. "I hope you're a good cook," I replied, trying for a tone of lighthearted banter. It came out a little strained. "I'm a carpenter," he said, stepping into my kitchen and setting the bag on the counter. "I'm good at following instructions." And this, he pulled a bottle of red wine from the bag, is good at making everything taste better. He took over my small kitchen with a comfortable efficiency. I found myself relegated to the role of sous chef, rinsing vegetables and finding pans. I watched him chop an onion with quick, precise movements, his large hands surprisingly deft. We worked in the small space, our bodies often brushing against each other. Each accidental touch, an elbow against my arm as he reached for a spice, his hip bumping mine as he moved to the stove, was a small spark that lit up my nerve endings. He seemed completely unfazed, chatting easily about his day, about a difficult client, about a new type of wood he was excited to work with. I, on the other hand, was a mess of internal analysis. I was watching his hands, the same hands that had gripped the towel around his hips, now expertly dicing a tomato. I was listening to his voice, the same voice that had murmured in the steamy bathroom, now explaining the difference between redwood and cedar. The dissonance between the raw intimacy of the previous night and the casual domesticity of this one was making my head spin. "So, tell me about your painting," he said, stirring a fragrant sauce on the stove. "You said you paint light. What does that mean?" The question was direct, thoughtful. Not the usual, "So you're an artist, huh?" He was genuinely curious. I found myself opening up, explaining my fascination with transient moments, with the way light could transform a mundane object into something beautiful, something sacred. I talked about how I was trying to capture not just the light itself, but the feeling it evoked: nostalgia, peace, loneliness. He listened intently, his eyes on my face, nodding slowly. "So you're not just painting a thing," he said when I finished. "You're painting a feeling. That's really cool." He said it with such simple sincerity that it disarmed me completely. No one had ever summed up my work so concisely, so perfectly. We ate at my small dining table, the one usually covered in art books and sketches. The pasta was delicious, the wine was good, and the conversation flowed more easily than I could have imagined. We talked about our childhoods, about places we'd traveled, about dreams we had that felt too big to say out loud. He told me about wanting to one day build his own house, from the ground up, with his own two hands. I told him about my dream of having a solo show in a real gallery. There was a moment of comfortable silence as we finished our wine. The city lights twinkled outside my window. The atmosphere in the room was warm, intimate, a world away from the sterile quiet that usually filled the space. Then he looked at me, his expression turning serious again, echoing that moment in the bathroom. "Can I ask you something, Leo?" My stomach tightened. "Sure. Yesterday," he started, his voice lower now. "In the bathroom. Did I make you uncomfortable?" The question was a landmine, a direct hit. My mind raced for a safe answer. A simple no felt like a lie of omission. A yes felt like an accusation. The truth, that it was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of my life, was not an option. "I am caught. There is no easy way out of this." His gaze is steady, unwavering. He is not going to let me deflect. He wants an honest answer. "It was unexpected," I finally said, choosing my word carefully. He nodded slowly, accepting that. I figured, "Look, I know it was a weird thing to ask. My friends would have just told me to suck it up. But, I don't know. You seemed like someone who would. Understand." "Understand what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He leaned forward, his forearms on the table. The space between us shrank. "That sometimes you just need a little help. And it doesn't have to mean anything more than that." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "Unless you want it to." There it was. The loaded statement. The door pushed open just a little wider. He was giving me an out and an invitation, all in the same breath. My heart was hammering so loudly I was sure he could hear it across the table. He was perceptive. He wasn't oblivious. He knew, or at least he suspected. The wink wasn't just a wink. The date wasn't just a joke. He had been testing the waters, gently, carefully, and now he was waiting for me to react. My fear of rejection was a cold, heavy weight in my gut. It was a familiar feeling, a constant companion. It whispered all the reasons I should retreat, play it safe, pretend I didn't understand the subtext. "He's just being nice. You're misreading everything. You're going to make a fool of yourself." But then I looked at him, really looked at him. At the earnest expression on his face, the slight vulnerability in his eyes. He was taking a risk, too. A big one. He was laying his cards on the table, trusting me not to mock him, not to shut him down. And in that moment, my fear was eclipsed by a surge of something else. Admiration, and a desperate, aching hope. I took a slow breath. What if I do? I asked, the words so quiet they were almost lost in the space between us. Julian didn't smile. He just watched me, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, taut, and electric. He seemed to be weighing my words, weighing me. Then, a slow, small smile touched his lips. It wasn't his usual easy grin. It was something softer, more private. Then that makes things a lot more interesting, he said. He stood up and began to gather our plates. The moment of confrontation had passed, leaving behind a new kind of tension. It wasn't the anxious, uncertain tension of before. It was a humming, thrumming awareness. An acknowledgement. We both knew now. The pretense was gone. I helped him with the dishes, our hands brushing in the soapy water. This time, the touch lingered. His fingers grazed mine, a deliberate, gentle contact that sent a shiver through me. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with everything we hadn't said. After the kitchen was clean, we drifted into the living room. It felt like the natural conclusion of the evening, but neither of us knew what the next step was. We stood near the window, looking out at the city lights. I should probably go, he said, but he made no move to leave. He was standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, smell the faint scent of wine on his breath. You don't have to, I said, my voice bolder than I felt. He turned to face me. The light from the street lamp below cast his face in shadow, highlighting the strong line of his jaw. Leo, he said, his voice a low murmur. I don't really know what I'm doing here. Me neither, I confessed. It was the truest thing I had said all night. Good, he said, a hint of a smile in his voice. Then we can figure it out together. And then he closed the small distance between us. He moved slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. He cupped my face in his large, warm hands. His calloused thumbs stroked my cheeks, a rough, comforting sensation. My eyes fluttered shut. My entire body was trembling. This was it, the breaking point. He leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. The kiss was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't fiery or demanding. It was soft, hesitant, questioning. It was a conversation without words. His lips were warm and gentle, tasting of red wine and a courage I didn't possess. I responded tentatively at first, a lifetime of caution holding me back. Then he made a soft sound in the back of his throat, a low hum of affirmation, and something inside me broke free. I leaned into him, my hands coming up to rest on his chest. I could feel the steady, solid beat of his heart under my palm. It was a comforting anchor in the dizzying swirl of sensation. The kiss deepened, becoming more confident, more sure. It was a kiss of relief, of discovery, of reciprocation. It was the feeling of coming home to a place you've never been before. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He didn't let go of my face. He rested his forehead against mine, our eyes closed. I could feel his breath on my lips, warm and steady. Okay, he whispered, a shaky laugh in his voice. So, that was not nothing. No, I agreed, my own voice thick with emotion. Not nothing. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes dark and serious in the dim light. I've been wanting to do that since the first time I saw you in the mailroom, trying to juggle your packages and your keys. My heart seized. What? But you never said anything. Neither did you, he pointed out gently. I just figured. You weren't interested. Or you were. You know. I thought you were. You know. I countered, a giddy, disbelieving laugh bubbling up inside me. The months of silent pining, of careful observation, of assuming and misreading. It was all so absurdly, wonderfully wrong. Nope, he said, his smile finally returning, wide and brilliant. Just clueless about how to talk to the beautiful, quiet painter across the hall. He called me beautiful. The word landed in my chest and bloomed, a warm, radiant flower. He kissed me again, and this time there was no hesitation. It was a kiss of certainty, of a new beginning. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, wanting to erase any space that had ever existed between us. The silence of my apartment was finally, irrevocably broken, and in its place was a sound that was so much better. The sound of his breathing, the beat of his heart, the quiet, undeniable proof that I was no longer alone. I woke to the unfamiliar weight of an arm slung across my chest and the scent of someone else in my sheets. For a disoriented moment, panic flared. Then the memories of the previous night rushed back in a warm, dizzying flood. Julian, the dinner, the confession, the kisses. We had fallen asleep on my couch, tangled together, fully clothed, like teenagers who had exhausted themselves with the sheer emotional effort of it all. Morning light, my old friend and subject, was streaming through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was the same light I painted every day, but this morning it looked different. Sharper, more vibrant. Julian was still asleep, his face relaxed, his breathing deep and even. His dark hair was a mess against my throw pillows. I watched the slow rise and fall of his chest, the way his eyelashes rested against his cheek. In sleep, his confident exterior was softened, revealing a peaceful vulnerability. This was a moment I wanted to paint. Not just the light, but the feeling. The quiet intimacy, the profound sense of safety. But I didn't move. I was terrified that any motion would shatter the fragile perfection of it. I laid there, barely breathing, committing every detail to memory. After a while, his eyes fluttered open. They were hazy with sleep for a moment, then they focused on me. A slow, lazy smile spread across his face. It was a private, unguarded smile, meant only for me. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick and gravelly with sleep. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Morning," I whispered back. He tightened his arm around me, pulling me closer until my face was buried in the warm curve of his neck. He smelled like sleep and my laundry detergent. It was an impossibly domestic, intimate scent. "I had a weird dream," he said into my hair. "I dreamed I finally kissed the painter across the hall." "That wasn't a dream," I said, my voice muffled by his shoulder. "Good," he said, pressing a soft kiss to the top of my head. "Because I was hoping it was real." We stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in a cocoon of morning light and quiet contentment. There was no awkwardness, no unease. It felt natural, right, as if this was how my mornings were always meant to begin. The silence in the room was no longer a void, but a shared, comfortable space between us. Eventually, the need for coffee became too strong to ignore. I carefully untangled myself from his embrace. The loss of his warmth was immediate. He watched me with sleepy eyes as I moved to the kitchen. "I make a mean cup of coffee," he offered, starting to sit up. "You're the guest," I said, pointing a finger at him. "You stay put. Besides, you cooked last night." He grinned and settled back into the cushions, looking ridiculously, unfairly attractive in the morning sun. "Okay, but I'm a harsh critic." As I measured out the coffee grounds, my hands moving on autopilot, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Julian, the man from my daydreams, was on my couch. We had kissed. He had slept here. He had said he'd wanted to kiss me for months. It was all too much, too good. A small, insidious voice of doubt began to whisper in the back of my mind. The voice of years of solitude and quiet disappointment. This is a fluke. A moment of curiosity for him. It can't last. I shook my head, trying to banish the thought. I would not self-sabotage this. I would not let my old fears poison this new, beautiful thing. I would take it one moment at a time. This moment, right now, was making coffee for the man on my couch. That was all I needed to focus on. I brought him a mug, and he took it with a grateful smile. He patted the cushion next to him, and I sat down, our knees brushing. We drank our coffee in a comfortable silence, watching the city wake up outside my window. "So," he said after a few minutes, his tone casual, but I could hear the underlying seriousness. "What happens now?" The question hung in the air, just as it had the night before. But this time it felt different. It wasn't a question of if, but how. "I don't know," I admitted, looking down into my mug. "This is new for me." "Me too," he said, and I looked up, surprised. "I mean not, guys, but this," he gestured between the two of us. The slow burn. The wanting something for months and being too scared to do anything about it. I'm usually the dive and headfirst type. I'm the stand on the edge of the pool and analyze the water temperature for a year type, I confessed with a small, wry smile. He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the room. "I know. I've seen you watching me from the window." The coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. A hot, mortifying blush crept up my neck. You knew? Of course I knew, he said, his expression softening. He reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering on my skin. I just thought you were judging my questionable landscaping choices. It's why I started trying harder with the flower beds. I stared at him, my mind reeling. He had known. All this time, my secret observations hadn't been secret at all. He had been watching me, watching him. We had been in a silent, long-distance dance, and I hadn't even realized he was my partner. The thought was both deeply embarrassing and incredibly, overwhelmingly romantic. So the water heater, I started, a suspicion dawning. He held up a hand. That was real, I swear. The universe just has excellent timing. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes sparkling with amusement over the rim of the mug. But the pulled shoulder? Maybe a slight exaggeration. I probably could have gotten it myself if I'd contorted like a circus freak. I just shook my head, a disbelieving laugh escaping me. You're unbelievable. I'm resourceful, he corrected. I saw an opportunity, and I took it. He put his mug down and turned to face me fully, his expression growing serious again. And I'm glad I did. Because this, he gestured between us again, feels right. Don't you think? I met his gaze. The doubt, the fear, it was all still there, a faint humming in the background. But looking into his honest, open face, it was easy to ignore. The feeling of rightness was so much stronger. It was a clear, bright note that drowned out all the noise. Yeah, I said, my voice full of a conviction that surprised me. It really does. He leaned in and gave me a slow, sweet morning kiss. It tasted of coffee and certainty. It was a promise. The days that followed were a gentle unfolding. Julian's water heater was fixed, but he seemed to find 100 other reasons to be in my apartment. He'd show up at my door with takeout, claiming he'd ordered too much. He'd knock to borrow a book he had no intention of reading. He'd text me from a job site, a picture of a beautifully crafted dovetail joint with the caption, "Thought you'd appreciate the artistry." Each interaction was a small brick, building the foundation of something solid between us. We were learning each other's rhythms. I learned that he hummed when he was concentrating, that he was fiercely loyal to his friends, and that he had a surprising knowledge of classic films. He learned that I was useless before my first cup of coffee, that I got lost in my own head for hours at a time, and that I had a secret soft spot for terrible pop music. He never pushed. He let me set the pace, which was, admittedly, glacial. He seemed to understand my innate caution, my fear of moving too fast. He showed his affection not in grand declarations, but in small, steady actions. He started leaving a toothbrush in my bathroom. He brought me a special kind of linseed oil he'd found that he thought I might like for my paints. He'd sit on my couch and read while I painted, his quiet presence a comforting anchor rather than a distraction. One rainy Saturday, he found me staring at a blank canvas, my frustration a palpable thing in the room. I was stuck, unable to translate the feeling in my head into something tangible. "What's wrong?" he asked, coming to stand behind me, his hands resting gently on my shoulders. "I can't get it," I sighed, leaning my head back against his chest. "I have this image, this feeling, but it won't come out." He was quiet for a moment, his chin resting on the top of my head. "Maybe you're trying too hard," he said softly. "Maybe you just need to live in it for a while." He turned me around to face him. "Come on," he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. "We're going out." "But it's pouring," I protested. "Exactly," he said, pulling me towards the door. He drove us out of the city, towards the hills that were shrouded in mist. We ended up at a deserted hiking trail, the rain coming down in a steady, cleansing sheet. He pulled 2 large rain ponchos from his trunk. "You came prepared," I said, impressed. "I'm a carpenter," he repeated, his personal mantra. "Measure twice, cut once, and always have rain gear in the trunk." We walked through the woods, the only sounds the drumming of rain on our hoods and the squelch of our boots in the mud. The world was washed in shades of green and gray. The air smelled of damp earth and wet leaves. It was beautiful. We didn't talk much. We just walked, side by side. At a scenic overlook, we stopped, looking out at a valley filled with fog. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. "See," he said, his voice quiet. "No pressure. Just being." I turned to look at him. His face was wet with rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked at me, his expression full of a soft, steady affection that made my heart ache in the best possible way. And in that moment, I understood. The feeling I had been trying to capture on canvas. That sense of peace, of safety, of a light that feels like coming home. It wasn't something to be found in a sunbeam on a dusty floor. It was right here, standing in front of me, in the rain. I reached out and pulled his face towards mine, kissing him with a sudden, fierce urgency. It was a kiss of gratitude, of understanding. He responded instantly, his arms wrapping around me, pulling me tight against him. We stood there on that misty hilltop, two men in ridiculous plastic ponchos, kissing like the world was ending, or perhaps just beginning. When we got back to my apartment, soaked and happy, I went straight to my easel. I picked up a brush, and without thinking, I began to paint. I didn't paint the landscape. I didn't paint the rain. I painted the feeling. I used bold strokes of gray and green and a startling, warm slash of yellow. It was abstract and messy and more honest than anything I had ever painted before. Julian sat on the couch, watching me, a quiet, knowing smile on his face. That night, for the first time, he didn't go back to his own apartment. We lay in my bed, the rain still tapping softly against the window pane. This was another threshold, another new intimacy, and my old anxieties whispered at the edges of my mind. But his presence beside me was a solid, reassuring weight. He laced his fingers through mine in the dark. "You know," he whispered into the quiet room, "I'm falling in love with you, Leo." The words were simple, direct. There was no fanfare, no dramatic pause. He said it like he was stating a fact, like the sky is blue, or wood has grain. My breath caught in my chest. All the air seemed to leave the room. I had dreamed of hearing words like that, but I had never truly believed I would. Hearing them from him, from Julian, felt like a miracle. My throat was tight with 1,000 emotions. I started, my voice trembling. "I think I've been in love with you since you moved in." He squeezed my hand. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I kind of figured." I turned on my side to face him. In the faint light from the street, I could just make out the shape of his smile. I leaned in and kissed him, a long, slow kiss that was a promise and a confession all in one. It was a conscious choice, a deliberate step into a future I had never allowed myself to imagine. The next morning, I woke up first. I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen to make coffee. As the water heated, I stood by the window, looking out at the rain-washed city. The world felt new, scrubbed clean. I felt a pair of strong arms wrap around my waist from behind, and a warm body press against my back. Julian rested his chin on my shoulder, his morning stubble scratching gently against my neck. "What are you thinking about so hard?" he murmured into my ear. I smiled, leaning back into his embrace. The silence of my apartment was gone for good. It had been replaced by him, by the quiet sounds of a shared life beginning. The hum of the refrigerator, the sigh of traffic, and now, the steady, comforting beat of his heart against my back. "Nothing," I said, turning my head to kiss him. Absolutely nothing at all. I was no longer just an observer. I was in the painting, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally home. The light was everywhere,